the 2026 offensive line of the guys that we know in the room. And we'll start off with the two key returnees you have. So I just mentioned him a second ago. Cannon Boone is your returning starting center. I thought played well for State last year. Made start in every single game. A guy who had been around the program several years, had kind of slowly seen his role increase. And last year wins a starting job when you brought in multiple guys really to beat him. They brought in Kobe Keenan from Kentucky. They brought in Brendan Smith from UTEP. There was the kid who came over from Eastern Michigan that they kind of shown the door after the spring. All of those guys came in to compete for the starting job at center, and who ends up winning it? The guy who had been in the program in Cannon Boone. And again, I thought he played pretty well over the course of the season. Was not locked down, was not incredible by any means, but was a quality starting center for State. And in a group that struggled as much as they did, if you can get a quality starter, you will take that. And now you get him coming into year two, which I think is big. Obviously, Camario's already got some experience playing with him to this point, but they can continue to work on that relationship even more. But Camario getting those reps is big. It's also big for Camario to have a veteran center in front of him, a guy who has made those calls, has been in that spot before. The center position obviously going to be a guy who's barking out a lot of the stuff for the offensive line in terms of setting protection and determining, okay, hey, we are blocking to this guy in our run schemes. We're IDing the mic. I don't really know how all they work it in terms of the calls, how they make it in the Lebby offense. But typically that's what your center is going to handle, especially at the college level. So having a guy who's done that now for a full year is really good for State and bringing that back. And I think that can help out this offensive line quite a bit, that we're not starting over at center. We're bringing a guy back who has done it within this offense. Sixth-year player, gets granted that extra year of eligibility, a Bulldog through and through, leading the room. Obviously, you would prefer more than anything else to have a true stud left tackle that had coming back. But if there was anything else you could have, let me have a veteran center who knows what you're doing. You've got that in Cannon Boone as your first building block. That's a solid place to start. The other guy you have coming back, and it's kind of iffy how you consider him a returning player, but that's Blake Steen. As I mentioned earlier, Steen transfers in last offseason after the spring, coming over from Virginia. Had been a 2-year starter for the Cavaliers at right tackle, also made one start at right guard. Won State's starting right tackle job back in fall camp last year. Starts the season opener against Southern Miss. Was struggling there early on in that first half, but was still named State starter, guy with a ton of experience. He goes down with an injury in that first half against Southern Miss, done for the year. And, who's to say? I don't think State's offensive line would have been incredible had he stayed healthy, especially because, look, he had struggled in that first game. But you can't really take a one-game sample set, his first time playing in that uniform, not even a one game, a one-half sample set, and say that's the player he was going to be for State over the course of the entire season. Struggled early, but if you had him back the whole year, could that have helped you out quite a bit, having an experienced guy at that spot? At least then you would have known, okay, hey, Albert Reese is starting at left tackle. You have two veteran guys as your bookends. That probably helps you out quite a bit. Or maybe you let him take over at the guard spot when Zach Owens was struggling, kick Blake Steen inside. And again, then we're talking about either Javen James, Timothy Lewis. We have our opinions on that. But you probably would have been in a better spot. That's to say, if he would have been a solid starting player in the SEC. We don't know for sure. He is an experienced guy, though. He is someone that, again, last year won the starting job. He's at least gone through learning this offense. He hasn't gotten much playing time in the offense, but he has played a lot of college football. He's been in Starkville. He has familiarity with Coach Lodeholt, Coach Lebby, the system. That's your other guy returning in that room. And I think those are two guys that are going to have to be big players. Between him and Cannon Boone, they got to have big years. They got to be the guys leading this offensive line room. Then you look at the transfer class. Originally you thought you had 3 guys coming in as experienced transfers, but obviously we know what happened with Brandon Snee, not going to be a part of the team. So you only have 2 guys coming back that have real experience in college football. And DJ Chester from LSU is someone that you can kind of pencil in. It's going to be a starting lineman for Mississippi State this season. As a redshirt freshman at LSU, was their starting center. And look, was a all freshman team center in the SEC that year. I have talked about, I think a little bit of that is by default because how many guys are a 12-game starter at center or a 13-game starter at center as a freshman in the SEC. Was definitely the weak link on that LSU offensive line back in 2024. But, that was an offensive line that had 4 players drafted. It was his first time being a starter. That's kind of going to happen. And something I have said time and time again, even though he had some games where he was getting pushed around a little bit, if Brian Kelly thought he was completely unplayable, Brian Kelly would have benched him. The fact that he started every single game still counts for something. It suggests that there's enough good there to think he can be someone. Now, Cannon Boone's going to be state starting center, so at least I expect him to be state starting center. I would be surprised if you take Cannon Boone out of that role. Everything I talked about in terms of making the calls and making the checks within this offense, Boone is the one who has done it within this system. So I think he's still going to have that role. Where do you put DJ Chester? Last year, he became a swing player for LSU. Basically, if wherever they needed him to fill in, he filled in. Got some time at left tackle. Didn't go well for him. He played a little bit more at center, and that was a little bit better for him. Something I mentioned, Matt Moscana for LSU, Locked on LSU, has said that he's of the opinion, and some of what he's heard suggests that DJ Chester might be best suited to play guard. And I think that's probably where you're going to see him play for Mississippi State. He's going to be one of those guard spots. Could be an upgrade over what you had. If he can at least be as good as Jacoby Jackson, who I thought was solid, I think you're in a good spot. And if you're talking about comparing to Zach Owens, you got a chance to be better than that. That'd be a really good place as well. But Chester's a guy I fully expect to start. The only other transfer you have with significant game experience is Miles McVay coming over from North Carolina. This is a guy that started his career at Alabama under Nick Saban, was a 4-star signee with a ton of offers coming out of high school. Spent a couple years in Tuscaloosa, redshirted 1 year, and then didn't really play much as a redshirt freshman. Goes to Chapel Hill this past season and was not a starter, did not make any starts for UNC, but got playing time at both left and right tackle. Saw his role increase as the season went along, became a part of that regular rotation on offensive line. And I think a lot of people around UNC showed some flashes in a guy they thought would have competed for a starting job going into this season, and a guy who could be a promising player. Again, has played both left and right tackle, which for State would certainly be beneficial to be able to fill in at either one of those spots. I think he's listed around 350 pounds. I mean, I can check that real quick. As I scroll down the roster, and I've already gone past him. Yeah, 6'6", 350. I mean, at 350, if you wanted to put him at guard, you absolutely could do that as well. And I don't really know, if that's what best suits his skill set, but he's got the frame for that also. So could give you some position versatility, has at least gotten game reps against power conference competition and showed enough in those reps to think that, hey, he could continue to develop and could compete for a starting role. That's it in terms of guys who have experience coming in. Now you look at the rest of the transfer class, and now it's younger guys who have got potential. Tyler Miller coming over from LSU was a highly rated signee out of the state of Mississippi. A couple, going into last year for the Tigers, didn't play as a true freshman, dealt with some injuries, practiced at both tackle spots. As I need to adjust my camera there. Also, another guy who's got size, could play guard. He's up around 335, and I think the scouting report on him that I was reading up from Cooper Patanglia at 247 Sports thinks, probably talking about him as a guy that would most likely project as either a right tackle or at guard. May not have the fluidity for left tackle, but was practicing some at left tackle for the Tigers this past season. Bulldog Mississippi's up to you as well. Glad to see you here. But again, got the size. If you wanted to kick him inside, you could do that. Could play him in a tackle spot, though. Very high ceiling, talented young player. Mario Nash, kind of the same way. With him, it's been a matter of can he get the weight up. But this is a kid that obviously State recruited hard a couple of years ago, or I guess going into this past season. Didn't happen for him. He ends up going to Florida State. A lot of people around Tallahassee were really excited about him and his potential within the program. He hits the portal again. It was kind of a battle to get him to Mississippi State once again, but you get him to State and another talented guy, and he's gotten his weight up as well. That was the other thing with Mario Nash. Right now, 6'4", 305. When he was, being listed at around 270 something back in the winter. So he's gotten his weight back up into a place where you could see him to compete a little bit. And a guy who's got some good athleticism. I think some have said he probably projects better at a guard. I feel like he would need to put on more weight for that, but could potentially have the size to be able, the lean that you're looking for, that he could be a guy to help out of the edge. Trey Clark asking, who's the Arkansas O-line who came in via the portal? About to talk about him. That is L.J. Perdome. Another guy, young player for Arkansas that season. Really only played special teams. I think got a few other reps beyond that as he took his red shirt. But a guy that the folks around Fayetteville were really excited about his potential. They felt like there was some nastiness to his game, that a guy that going forward they could coach up, develop, and he was going to be a big contributor for them and would have been able to fight for playing time this season, if not compete for a starting job this season. And look, Sam Pittman, say what you will about him, but O-line development has overall been good throughout his career. There were a couple down years there at Arkansas, but his last season, they still had a pretty good offensive line. And even 2 years ago, they kind of got okay. They've really only had one bad offensive line during his time there. So this was a guy in L.J. Perdome that they felt really good about. Expected to compete as a guard at Mississippi State and could potentially fight for one of those starting roles. Isaiah Dent from Oklahoma. Definitely, kind of a stereotypical tackle, 6'6", 320, redshirt sophomore, another Mississippi native coming home. Only saw playing time in one game for the Sooners. I believe another guy that kind of battled some injuries. But you're talking about guys who had a lot of big-time opportunities coming out of high school. And then finally, Jalen Matthews, who had started his career at Rutgers before ended up at Florida State. 6'6", 350, probably, again, an interior offensive line guy, but could potentially work as a tackle. These are young guys where the ceiling is really high. There is potential in the room for these to be players that could end up working out really, really well for them. You just don't have any experience out of this group. Like I said, of these 5 guys who have come in, only 2 of them have game action. That's Perdome and Dent. And in the case of Perdome, like I said, I think it was all special teams. Maybe he got a couple offensive snaps. But Matthews, Nash, and Miller have not played. So ceiling is high, but how much are they helping you out this year? It's a big question for sure. Bulldog Mississippi saying the O-line situation is what could tank everything this season. Yeah, we've talked a lot about that already. They got to get this group figured out. So it was an interesting transfer group that came in because these are guys that you feel like you're almost setting yourself up better for the future, which they had to do. They had to improve what does the future of this room look like. But in the short term, in a make-or-break season, how much does it help? Lastly, talk about a few guys who maybe could be in for a bigger role. Your JUCO guys at tackle, Saquon Miles, Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins. Miles was the top JUCO tackle going into last season. State had to beat out Ole Miss, Auburn to get him. Was a big signing. Probably projects most as a right tackle, but only saw action, in one game last year, took a red shirt. Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins, I think they feel like he's more of a left tackle type, but again, one game. Will one game of red shirting be enough to make those guys SEC ready coming out of the JUCO ranks? There's also Matthew LaFoe, who's the big body guy, another JUCO signing they had, to compete for guard. TJ Lockhart, Tyler's older brother, feels like he's probably in position to start competing for at least a rotational spot at guard. And then a couple of redshirt freshmen. Spencer Dowland, who was your top-rated O-lineman committed in the last class. State had to beat out some good programs to get him. I think Auburn was in the mix there. Ole Miss was in the mix. That was a really good signing. And then Braden Turnage is an interesting young player, kind of a project lineman, guy who didn't get into playing offensive line until later in his career. 6'7", 320, basketball background, really athletic player. That's a guy that if the traits click, you might have something special. But it's probably talking about a couple years. I don't know how much he's really going to factor in this season. I don't expect any true freshmen to really factor in. Talking about this room, and I think the overall depth and quality of the depth has gotten better. And year over year, I would say that for Lebby. That improved from year 1 to year 2 from Lebby, and I think it's improved again from year 2 to year 3. The young guys State has in this room are far more talented than the young guys Jeff Lebby had when he took over. What has not yet improved is your starting group on the field. That didn't improve year 1 to year 2. It arguably got worse. What is it year 2 to year 3 is kind of the next big question there. And the lack of experience is concerning, for sure. You've got 2 guys who have played considerable college football last season. You have 3 guys who have gotten starts last season. You got 3 guys who have been regular starters at any point in their career. 4 guys who have, at least gotten valuable reps. Definitely not major depth. And look, none of them superstars, at least not yet to this point in their careers. You're going to need some young guys to hit. There's no getting around it. They're going to need a couple of these young guys to really be basically a year ahead, if we're being honest. If I were trying to piece together what is your starting 5 right now, because we got that question, and this is post Brent, knowing that Brandon Snay's not available. Cannon Boone's going to be your starting center, and I think DJ Chester starts at 1 guard spot. Opposite of him, I'm going to just say for now, so much talk about LJ Perdome and the potential there, but I feel like they're going to want experience at the tackle spots. I think Miles McVay probably starts at left tackle, and Blake Steen starts at right tackle. So your other guard, yeah, but I think Tyler Miller, LJ Perdome, one of those 2 guys probably. Possible that Shumpert Perkins or Miles could compete for a starting role, and then at one of those spots, and then you could talk about kicking one of your tackles inside. But it's not very clear. And frankly, that's going to be the big thing that I'm looking for over these next few days as we start getting some practice reports coming out. Where are guys working and who seems to be leading the way? The concern, of course, is just that you are looking at a room where, truthfully, it's 1 returning starter. It's like 1.5 because Blake Steen was supposed to start but really didn't play. And, how much is that going to come together? For Bulldog, Mississippi, basically started from scratch in 2024. I don't doubt we're in a better position than before. It just seems like they're building bits and pieces every year. That's fair. That's totally fair. It feels like there is a slow build mentality to what they're doing here, which, if it works, could be the best thing for you. And that you have not done the quick fix approach. If it clicks and it all comes together, the best thing for you could be that you had this slow build because you're building it the right way and you're building a foundation that is stable. The problem is, if it doesn't work, you're just screwed. And you're starting over again. Because if it doesn't work, Jeff Lebby's not going to be your coach. And yeah, meanwhile, LSU and such just go out and buy a whole team in one offseason. Which, look, it's easy to sell that. And it's easy to go out and buy a whole team in one offseason when people believe in the coach and believe in the program. And I think Mississippi State is throwing legitimate NIL money around. I don't think it's a case where State doesn't have the money to compete, be able to get players. But you got to sell players on what you're building. And that's hard for State to do right now. And going to play for Kiffin and LSU, yeah, guys are ready to do that. And that's tough for State to this point to be able to sell anything close to that. It's a tough situation. So, yeah, man, the lack of experience is what concerns me the most, that you are kind of completely starting over once again in this room. Not entirely. You got your center back, but you only have one other guy returning on the roster who has played significant college football at all, and he hasn't even done it at Mississippi State. Then you only have one guy coming to the portal who has experience as a starter in college football with TJ Chester. And you didn't land a single transfer offensive lineman that you could point to and say, that dude is a known stud. Chester overall was not great at LSU. Miles McVay was not a starter at North Carolina, so we can't put him in that category just yet. All the other guys I talked about just haven't played. Even with Brandon Snee, you couldn't say for sure a stud. It was just, hey, this guy's been a starter for several years at different levels, was a solid player last season. Hopefully he can take another step forward, be a really good player for you in his final year of college football. But we didn't know that his final year of college football had come and passed already. So it's concerning. And as we've talked about a lot, if you don't get this group right, it's going to be trouble. It's going to be trouble. Now, if I'm going to be positive in what I look to, I do think there's a couple things that you could be optimistic about. I think the chance for the interior offensive line to be good is pretty decent. I think Cannon Boone, another step forward from him, and you just have a truly good college center. That's a good starting point. DJ Chester playing guard, if that is his truly most natural position, could you get the best version of him in his fourth year of college football, third year as being a guy contributing? Those is two of your interior spots. And again, I believe those are, if you were to say two guys that are going to start for Mississippi State football up front, those are the only two I would say for sure they're starting for Mississippi State: Cannon Boone, DJ Chester. Well, then I look at that other guard spot. Could you kick Blake Steen inside? And then you got a guy who's got a ton of college football experience. He's got the frame for it. He's, 340. He can play guard for sure. Tyler Miller, again, probably going to play tackle, but may project best as a guard. And that's a really talented young player. LJ Perdome, like I was talking about, Arkansas felt like he had a chance to compete for them. And then, you start looking at some of the other guys on the roster. Could TJ Lockhart be ready? Matthew LaFoe, for that matter. I think you got a good chance that your starting three between your guards and your center could be pretty solid. And look, if that group is good enough to just maul the guys in front of them, and you could at least have a good inside run game, we can win on inside zone. And then I'll be honest, with Camario and his legs, you only got to figure out one of the other tackle spots, because then you can just run zone read every play with the tackle that doesn't block well, if that's the case. I think you could have a better power run game this year between those the three interior guys. I think that's a reason for optimism. The other reason for optimism, as I've talked about, the talent level is there. You have guys that project as power conference level players throughout this room. In fact, there's really only a couple guys left over in the room, which, to be fair, every team's going to have a couple of those just from a depth standpoint, that you would not say you feel are power conference level players or SEC level linemen. But overall, I mean, Miller, Nash, Perdome, Dent, Matthews, Dowland, Turnage, Miles, Shumpert Perkins, Miles McVay, these guys that you don't know for sure whether or not any of them are going to be your starters, they're all guys that you would say would play at this level. So you have more options that you can look to and feel good about them stepping in and competing. Because frankly, look, the depth was better last year as well from a body standpoint, from a size standpoint. At the end of the day, State really still only had about 7 linemen that you would be willing to trot out last season, which was an improvement from where they were the year before. But in terms of guys that are like, I'd be willing to put this guy on the field against an SEC opponent, they had like 7 last year. You have, if that, 6 or possibly 7. This year, I would say that number's up. So the talent is better. If a couple of those guys click, you could have a group that's pretty solid. But you got to get them to click, and that's the concern. Who's going to click? I'm going to watch this group really closely, obviously, over the next few weeks as we try to figure some things out. They don't have to be great. Trey had it earlier. If we just had an average SEC O-line 2026, we will get to 6 wins, but I don't see it. If you have an average offensive line, I feel really good about this offense being good because I feel confident in Camario. I feel confident in the skill talent. I still feel confident in Jeff Lebby in running a good scheme. You got to be able to block. You got to be a little bit better blocking up front. Be able to run the football and do so effectively when you have a look to run the football. That's been more than anything else. That's what they have to get handled. Even the pass protection stuff, because if you're running the football more effectively, then it doesn't help you out when you comes time to protect for the passing game. But teams didn't have to worry about it and were able to really pin their ears back, and that created the problems they did. I do think the interior offensive line could be pretty good. The talent ceiling is solid. You just need guys to click, and you haven't yet seen enough from many of them to feel confident in that happening. It's a major question mark. We'll see how that works out.